Welcome back, everybody. And over to you, Teresa. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next session, back to track one. I'm pleased again to host this session. I think this is a particularly relevant topic as we're all creating more and more video every day, and not just media companies, but corporations, individuals, and we've all got a lot of it to manage. So I first met the team from Evoke Films I think 3 years ago at the Henry Stewart event in London, which might have been the last in-person one. So I've worked with Dan and his colleagues quite some time, and we share a mutual client that manages a lot of video advertising. So of course, video advertising is quite complex to make and quite complex to produce, and then it all has to go somewhere, and it has to have a lot of metadata. It has to get distributed in many different places. So today we're going to talk about video archives specifically, but also just how DAM plays a role or can play a role in the management of video. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dan, and he's got some slides to tell us a story. Dan, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you and your role?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Teresa, for hosting, and Henry Stewart Events for having me. Yeah, I'm Daniel Akerman. I'm the media manager at Evoke Films, which is a division of IMG and ultimately owned by Endeavour. And yes, I'm here to share my findings of developing a DAM system to house like a living, breathing, active archive. So my background, I've been working in the media industry for about 15 years. I started in production and then moved to TV broadcast and transmission. So I started in ingest and then became transmission controller and then the playout supervisor. So I've been involved in developing different workflows and production pipelines, and was part of a team that launched an ultra 4K ultra HD channel fully on the cloud. So yeah, I'm now media manager at Evoke Films, and we represent a luxury goods brand with a vast archive, and they've got strong ties to some major sporting events. So we've got active weekly productions that are feeding into the archive, as well as a huge amount of historical content in the vault. So what does our media team look like? Not this guy, unfortunately. The media team here is kind of often quite an anonymous part of the production workflow. We're sort of responsible for keeping the pulse of file creation and conversion and delivery moving along, and then wrapping up by indexing and storing these files, but it's not really that sexy. But who's this guy? He's pretty sexy. He's a drummer called Hal Blaine, and he played on hundreds of hit singles and over 40 number ones, and played on things like Good Vibrations and Be My Baby and Bridge Over Troubled Water, and played for Elvis and Frank Sinatra and the Byrds. But again, quite an anonymous, unrecognizable guy. And so, yeah, I kind of think of our media team as a sort of similar position, really, where whereas a lot of these songs wouldn't have sounded the same without him on. There's a lot of the media that we work on, the adverts and TV shows and live events, wouldn't be the same without our media team behind it, keeping it on track and on time. And I think ultimately works when it's working at its best, it kind of goes unnoticed, really. So we're just sort of working away in the background. So in terms of MAM and the progress we've made, it's been kind of slow and steady, but feels just like we're sort of at the crest of the wave at the moment. It's been, about 3 years in the making so far, I think. There's been a lot of sign-off required by different departments for our client, IT team, marketing, account managers, and various different other agencies have been involved. But the client system's now been through a full RFP phase, vendor demonstrations, and they've selected a preferred vendor. But in the meantime of all that happening, the client developing their own system, we set up our own system in-house as well. That's just for internal use. This was previously seen as kind of excessive and a bit of a luxury, but then as soon as the pandemic hit, it became absolutely essential. So previously kind of reliant on hard drives mainly. So our archive was basically a cupboard full of hard drives or a bunch of drives under people's desks and their drawers. And then as soon as everybody was set to remote working for 18 months, that became inaccessible, and we had to accelerate the development of our own system just to keep productions moving and make sure everybody had access to the media they required, and keep everything afloat basically. So yeah, this was just the MAM we use within Evoke Films, and then IMG Studios also has its own MAM which we interact with. There's also a lot of third-party governing body portals who have their own MAMs, so there's a lot of different platforms we have in play at the moment. So the things I've had to consider while developing our MAM to house this archive, there's a huge amount of media that we need to integrate. This includes 9,000 physical assets, which include tapes, film reels, DV cam, all sorts, as well as a lot of hard drives, as I mentioned. So the problem with this as well is with the active productions, the amount of media is just increasing per event. So while events from 20 years ago might have just had one film, one reel at the end of it, live events now have multiple feeds, multiple streams, playback, like replay packages and all sorts. So at the end of an event, there's a huge amount of data left over that needs to be handled and stored. Some of the more historical archive has got limited details with it. So when we've been assessing that, it's quite hard to figure out what's on there, what's relevant. Although with the archive, people often assume that when I say we've got 9,000 tapes to deal with, they seem to think that's going to be a huge nightmare to deal with. But actually, it's the hard drives that scare me the most, because the drives themselves can, when you open them up, it could be 4 terabyte, 8 terabyte, 12 terabyte drives with thousands of files in and all kinds of folder structures, and it's like looking inside a hoarder's garage sometimes when you open up one of these hard drives. And
Dan, I wondered if I could jump in and just ask a question on this, because I remember when we first met, again, we've never met in person, even though we've worked together. You talked about how during the pandemic there was the physical archives, and you couldn't even go in and work with them. So you sort of started in this role where you're talking about 9,000 physical media assets in storage, and yet you couldn't even leave your house to go work with them. Maybe touch on that a little bit here as you talk about that a bit.
Yeah. So to start with, we had to just do a mass dump of a lot of the most relevant material from hard drives onto the internal MAM we set up, and that was keeping the active productions going. And then I was able to get special access to the office to respond to requests while the whole building was shut down to everybody else, because it's a corporate office. And then since things have opened up, I've actually been able to go and visit the storage facilities where all the tapes are kept, and finally get to see the sort of scale of how much there is to deal with. So yeah, it's quite it's good to.
Was that overwhelming? I mean, was it more than you expected? I guess having been hired to manage these physical archives and you hadn't even seen them, was that surprising?
Yeah, It was better than I expected, actually, because when I heard of this storage unit with thousands of tapes, I was kind of expecting it to be a bit of a junk shop of just dusty boxes and scraps of paper here and there. But actually, the IMG library is very well maintained and stored. So everything is very neatly filed away, and there's a great system there. So when I actually got there and saw the full racks of shelves, it was quite reassuring to know there is quite a good system there in place. Things were, anytime I requested something, I knew exactly where it was. So it was actually quite reassuring to get to the unit and see it in real life, rather than just thinking about it for all these months.
Great, go ahead.
Yeah, so the hard drives can be the real problem, because across these digital assets, we've got multiple copies of files, different versions, and sometimes in there we've had a lot of corrupt files or degraded files when they've been converted or transcoded poorly. So it's a lot of material to sift through. So that leads to sort of a whole different level of due diligence that needs to be done before uploading material and transferring it around to check that it's decent quality, basically. Other considerations we've had really is, I mean, the audit of the archive was a big job. Just ironing out, like I say, all the unknowns and assumptions I had about what the archive was, to actually run a list of what we've got and to go and see it and handle all these tapes. That was a big job that's still ongoing, really, and it's we've got lots of different formats, like I mentioned, and we have to sort of come up with a standardized digital format we're going to keep archival copies in, and what kind of proxy profiles we need to make available for internal and external use for watermarking stuff. So it's all been a lot of considerations to how we're going to process all of the migration from physical media to the digital and cloud systems. Some of the film reels need to be scanned in and restored, because they're just 16mm films, and they're sitting in dusty tin cans in the library. But so that's all more considerations. We've also got media across a lot of different platforms, different cloud systems within like I mentioned, the other IMG cloud system, of our own cloud system, and third parties that we need to draw it all into one place, which requires a lot of different skill sets for the staff that wasn't there before. So it is kind of previously reliant on a lot of local knowledge of people knowing what production a particular shot came from, which hard drive it was on, where it's called, where the drive is, what the file might be called. So it's I mean, a lot of what I've been working on is trying to eliminate that need for one person knowing where everything is, and opening it up to being a more transparent system and better indexed. And for somebody, when we hire in a freelancer to come and do some research for us, he or she are able to find things without knowing, to look under somebody's desk for the hard drive.
And some of that data, I mean, I remember seeing a rights spreadsheet that was just giant and overwhelming. So a lot of that data is copyright, isn't it? And who owns what, and what rights both you or the client has to use them. And we're talking about sort of a multifaceted puzzle here, aren't we? How do you deal with that?
Well, that was the kind of driver for us having our own internal MAM, apart from the IMG one, because the client's footage and the interactions they have with third-party governing bodies, very sensitive relationships. So it was imperative that we ring-fenced all of the material we hold, and the rushes and different programs and footage we've been granted from the families of some of the sponsors and from the other governing bodies. So that was the big driver behind the internal MAM that we developed. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, going forwards, the metadata schema is going to be a hugely important factor, like I mentioned, to move away from that local knowledge and come up with a system that a whole new group of users are going to be interacting with, because from the client system, this is a multi-agency team, and they've each got their own search fields that they want, terms that they're going to be looking for, their own vocabulary, their own deliverables, and all of that needs to be factored into how we're going to tag and index all of the material from all of these different sources. And then the digitization project to get all of that material in is still ongoing, because there's, like I said, multiple physical assets and digital assets that need to be assessed and checked for standards. Where we keep the footage is also, there's a potential to have as much footage on the cloud as you want now, but it still costs money. And when we've been opening these boxes of tapes that haven't been looked at for 10 years, there's no real requirement to have that in some hot storage, like active storage that is instantly accessible, where you might be paying a lot more for it than if it was put in a kind of Glacier deep archive, because chances are it might be another 10 years before somebody needs to look at it again. So the filtering out and the dividing up of those storage areas has been another big project.
I'm curious about you just large files. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit. I know you're kind of alluding to the future here, and we can come back to that. But so many companies struggle with the management of large files. I mean, files are getting bigger. Cloud storage, it's not as cheap as people think it is it? Right?
No,
I think people, there was this whole impression storage is cheap, and I think that's kind of a carryover from when people just bought a server and stuck it in the basement. But the cost of cloud storage is not cheap when you're talking about raw video or brushes or all of these pre-production sorts of materials. So how do you handle that? Because you're a studio that's generating a lot of media. So maybe talk about that: the hot storage, the cold storage, the brushes, the finals. Where do you decide where to put it?
Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, that's one of the big discussions we're having. In that, like I was mentioning, older programs and things that have been made, there was a finite amount of storage available at the time. So with what's available now, that's quite easy to file away programs from 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. There's, there might only be a few hours of footage for a few day event, whereas now you could have, hundreds of hours of footage for a single couple of hours event. So in terms of rushes and things, we just, we've got stacks and stacks of G-RAID drives with the sort of source materials, and all of those are backed up. So that's a double amount of hard drives. And then it's, we'll put a lot of that into, once a program master's been made and that's delivered to the distribution platform, we'll store that, the large files in the more cold storage on either Glacier cloud systems or LTO tapes we're still using. So because like I said, it's not as cheap as people think. And when people say, oh, we'll just put it in the put it in the cold, the cloud, it's still, once you're talking hundreds, thousands of terabytes, it's quite a chunky monthly bill.
It's prohibitive, isn't it? And I think we've perhaps in the industry sort of defaulted that cloud is always the solution now, but with large media, that's definitely not the case, is it? It just doesn't make economic or practical sense in some cases.
I don't know, people see this kind of unlimited storage option, but then don't necessarily factor in that there are savings to be made when you're on larger scale, but it's still thousands of pounds a month for storage of files that may never be looked at again sometimes. So it's being need to be quite discerning when choosing the files to upload, essentially, and filtering out what doesn't need to be kept.
That's right.
But that kind of part of the process really needed a sort of editorial eye over it from people that have been involved in the programs, people that know the accounts or the sports overall, to know, you know, this might not be valuable now, but it will be in the future, or this is great exclusive footage that isn't available elsewhere. So yeah, it's really been a matter of getting everybody involved, from production coordinators to executive producers, to sort of give their opinion, but also to, with that, you have to then wrestle some of the material off them, because some people just want to keep everything because they see this unlimited tag of cloud storage and don't want to relinquish, you know, any amount of daily rushes from 30 years ago.
Yeah, some of it is just the challenge of defining value, isn't it? You know, is there still value to this file, and will we ever use it again? And everyone kind of comes up with some reason like, yes, we might use it again in this rare instance, but it is tough to get. I mean, to speak to your last point, maybe about governance, is governance a challenge, and is it especially when you're in a situation where you're managing assets for, as an organization, you have many clients, and you have an internal MAM system. You might have clients that have different standards and desires in terms of what to store. So how do you govern this multi-client MAM environment that you're dealing with?
Yeah, so this is kind of the phase we're up to at the minute. We've got a sort of steering committee set up with different representatives from each of the agencies, and they have to give their input on what they value and what they want to prioritize in terms of storage and indexing, and we just have to work for it from there, and yeah, try and limit it as much as we can. But at the same time, sort of the whole point of it is to increase the accessibility to, you know, the creative people to try and find the footage they need, find something that hasn't been seen before. So we don't want to just be keeping program masters that are going to be reused and reused. We want to give them, give the creative teams access to this footage that hasn't been tapped before, for maybe something that wasn't relevant 10 years ago that might have some specific meaning now. So it's all about trying to discern the value and trying to index it in a way that would be come up on a search when, you know, something quite niche has been looked for. Yeah.
We've got some questions coming in the audience, but I think, did you have another slide? I think you might have.
No, it's pretty much it. Yeah, that's
okay,
the summary of where we're up to now. Yeah, so yeah, just there's a lot of that's been I mean, like I said, when I first started the sort of digitization, I really envisaged the actual physical digitization being the big part of the task, loading up FlexiCarts with tapes, but actually in the production planning, that's going to be a very small part of it. It's kind of outsourced to a specialist team that's going to take care of it. That's sort of 80%, 90% of the work is the audit and filtering out what we're keeping and getting people to draw lines through things and discarding copies of or submasters, and, you know, really having to be quite brutal with what we decide to keep and what we what we sort of invest in preserving for the future.
Perfect. Okay, we've heard that start now thing a few times in some of the earlier sessions today. The earlier you can start, the better. The sooner you can bring in a media manager or a DAM manager, the better. So that's consistent advice we're hearing today. Let's look at some of the questions that come in the time we have left. And for those of you, see we have a quite a big group here on the session. Please put your questions in the Q&A tab. So someone is specifically asking about timecode based logging and shot listing of the archive material, and is wondering if you're doing that. And this looks like this person is a video producer, or at least involved, because saying that's obviously can be very time consuming. So are you doing that time-based logging?
So we have, I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but we have our sort of master files that we use for construction programs. And when we're backing up our projects, we will export all of the subclips that have been used in programs to be able to recreate timelines and rebuild projects if they need to be brought back online in years' times. But yeah, I think that's
yeah, I think it's also, I think the question probably also alludes to, so for like every, I've seen some video archives where like every 30 seconds has its own metadata, for example, or every, so it's not just logging metadata about the video, but logging metadata within the segments of the video. Is that something?
Yes, so that's part of the development of the pipeline we're trying to get in. Is there's as well as the kind of transcript AI kind of automatic transcript comes up when we're logging videos. We are working on the sort of the teaching side of the AI at the moment, because it's obviously not out of the box system, and to get it to be producing any valuable tagging, it takes a while to get it going. So yeah, we're working on that at the moment in terms of logging action, crowd shots, close-ups, and all that sort of stuff. But it's again, like I say, it's not out of the box, and it takes a while to get that up and running. So yeah, that's part of the development of the new system for sure. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Another question around just adoption of a system. So you talked a bit about governance and the different agencies you have, and obviously lots of different clients in play. How do you drive adoption of a system like this in an organization like yours?
Well, our internal one was set up, from scratch, just to meet the needs of our productions. And the client one is, we've been developing that cross-agency from the beginning. So it's for every part of it, it's been factoring in the needs of each individual agency, and trying to meet those, because each part of, whether it's making programs, advertising, print, they all need to be considered and factored in. So it's just been keeping the dialogue open through the whole vendor process, and all the planning that's going into the sort of migration and setup of the metadata schemes and stuff, like I mentioned.
Yeah, it can be very lots of moving parts. I was going to say overwhelming. I don't want to apply that though. It's just there's lots of moving parts that you probably are dealing with there. So I wondered specifically, we got another question about just sort of large media files, and so we talked a bit about just storage and the volume of them, but in terms of ingesting large media files, we had a session earlier where somebody was talking about it was actually Paul from UEFA, and a couple other people today have talked about photographers being able to upload directly to systems or to FTPs, where then the system picks them up. What do you do in a situation like this, where you're talking about this incredibly high resolution camera doing 4K plus video, and at a sporting event? I mean, how does it work in terms of ingestion? How do you actually get these files?
Yeah, so we have got some sort of camera to MAM systems in place that upload straight to the MAM, and then we've got plugins so editors can work directly with that. It will generate proxies that they can work through offline edits while the footage is still being ingested, and then once they've got their edits in place, they only need to restore the high-res footage that they've used from all these rushes. A lot of it is as well as the kind of logging on the ground, so it's being logged as it goes in, so not to avoid these kind of big bottlenecks of reams and reams of unlogged material that's just sitting there. So it's trying to get as much information into the file and into the tagging as it's uploaded, to try and best serve the people looking for it later.
It's sometimes is tough to accommodate. I mean, part of what we've talked about is accommodating the people producing the media, and yet getting what you need as well. You don't want to kind of force them to do something that they're miserable about, but getting that media is obviously obviously very important. But that's great. Camera to MAM is always awesome if you can do that, of course, especially with a large media file. So I imagine at sporting events, though, that a lot of those cameras, they're probably hooked up to some pretty big network there, or a pretty powerful network at a sporting event.
Yeah, certainly. And we don't necessarily need all of the feeds for everything. Often we'll use the portals of the events organizers to sort of take the select, and then we're kind of filtering out a lot of unnecessary footage, storing it for the sake of it. Yeah.
All right. Well, we are just out of time now. So thank you very much, Dan, for joining us and for sharing your insights and advice for everybody. Thanks for attending. We've got a few more sessions today for those of you who are hopefully still sticking around for the last couple of sessions. And then there's a little bit of virtual social hour. So up next in track 1 is how to best manage your metadata with John Horodisky, who's always insightful and entertaining. And then in track 2, we have best practices for content monitoring with Fidel. So, and don't forget to wind down at the end of a busy day. You can tell that I'm reading a script, can't you? With our breathwork seminar. So if you haven't done your meditation yet for the day, feel free to check that out, as well as the exhibition and visit some of the sponsors. So thank you, Dan. Applause, applause. And thank you, everyone, for attending. Very much appreciated. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.